Welcome to the Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. The U.S. Treasury Department issued a statement revising some of its investment restrictions involving the Chinese Communist Party's military and companies. The restrictions' effective date has been postponed to late May. The delay has raised questions. Gina Raimondo, President Biden's nominee of Secretary of Commerce, did not specify his approach to Huawei and other Chinese issues at a congressional hearing on Wednesday. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said that the U.S. would not use untrusted suppliers like Huawei that threaten national security. Last November, former U.S. President Donald Trump issued an executive order. Starting on January 11th of this year, investors would be prohibited from investing in Chinese companies that are owned or controlled by the Chinese Communist Party's military. These companies are determined by the Department of Treasury or Department of Defense. On January 27th, the U.S. Department of the Treasury released a statement from the Office of Foreign Assets Control. The statement is to postpone the effective date of the ban from January 11th to May 27th. U.S. investors will be allowed to invest in companies that are similar to the group of companies blacklisted for having ties with China's military. President Biden's Secretary of Commerce nominee Gina Raimondo said in a testimony to the Congress on January 26, "We need to ensure that American workers and manufacturers can compete fairly on the global playing field. We need to invest in innovation and technology in our manufacturing sector and take aggressive trade enforcement actions to combat unfair trade practices from China and other nations that undercut American manufacturing." Gina Raimondo, U.S. President Joe Biden's nominee for Secretary of Commerce, presented her testimony before the Senate Commerce Committee on the 26th. When asked if the Biden administration would continue former President Trump's policies, would Biden's administration keep Huawei on the blacklist, Gina Raimondo did not explicitly state her stance. Representative Michael McCaul, ranking member of the House of Foreign Affairs Committee, issued a statement. He urged his Senate colleagues to withhold approval of Gina Raimondo as Commerce Secretary over concerns about her stance on Huawei. The confirmation of her position would be held until the Biden administration has a clear indication whether to keep Huawei on the Commerce Department list of entities. On the 27th, U.S. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki was also being asked the same question by reporters at a regular White House press conference. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said, "We will ensure that U.S. telecommunication networks do not use equipment from untrusted vendors. We will work with allies to protect their telecommunications networks and invest in expanding the telecommunications of trusted U.S. and allied companies, production of equipment." However, Huawei's infiltration has long been a threat to U.S. national security. The Washington Free Beacon reported on May 26 that MIT Media Lab founder Nicholas Negroponte published an article on May 2019. "Don't ban Huawei, do this instead." However, it is questionable whether the article was actually written by Nicholas Negroponte himself. A Huawei employee named Winter Wright claimed on his LinkedIn profile that he wrote the pro-Huawei article on Nicholas Negroponte's behalf. He has now removed his account. Biden's administration Department of Homeland Security issued a warning of its own National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin Board on January 27th. DHS warns the public that the ideologically motivated violent extremists may continue to commit violence in the coming weeks. DHS pointed out that it is a result due to individuals' frustrations with the exercise of governmental authority and the presidential transition. Now, I strongly recommend all of you to take the time to read the bulletin thoroughly. There are 3 specific points I want to bring to your attention. The first one, in the opening summary of the bulletin, it suggests they have information that some ideologically motivated violent extremists have objections to the exercise of government authority and the presidential transition. Now, what I find confusing is how they choose to word this. Is it just the objection to government authority and the presidential transition that constitutes an individual as being an ideologically motivated violent extremist? The second thing I need to bring to your attention is this term domestic violent extremist, or DVE. I want to address specifically what this bulletin states is what DVEs are motivated by. Granted, it does say these domestic violent extremists are motivated by a range of issues, but once again, the way it's worded is suspicious. Domestic violent extremists clearly generates thoughts of fear and condemnation, which would be a natural response. Now, everyone agrees that decisive action must always be taken when dealing with any and all domestic extremists. But how can the Department of Homeland Security justify and guarantee that this extreme label is not used for suppressing free speech? Is it reasonable to label someone who is angry about COVID-19 restrictions or someone who is angry about the 2020 election result as a domestic violent extremist? Well, that's exactly what the bulletin says. And you can see the slippery slope we are walking on. Now, the third one is another extreme label that could be used to villainize citizens who utilize free speech to express themselves. It says, threats of violence against critical infrastructure, including the healthcare sector, increased in 2020, with violent extremists citing misinformation and conspiracy theories about COVID-19. Once again, violent extremists must not be allowed to go unchecked in society. But how can a quote-unquote conspiracy theory be even labeled violently extreme? And who will be in charge of deciding what is or is not a conspiracy theory? Facebook? Maybe Twitter. As you can see, the slope just got a whole lot more slippery. Without clarity, you can see how concerning this Department of Homeland Security bulletin is. Now, I know the eye-opener viewers are extremely intelligent. Please take the time to read the bulletin and tell me in the comments what your thoughts are on the DHS bulletin. Now, according to Breitbart News Wednesday, January 27th, a new poll shows House GOP Conference Chairwoman Representative Liz Cheney has seen her political support completely collapse in Wyoming as solid majorities of both Republicans and all voters in the state want her out of office. The survey of 500 likely voters was conducted by Trump's pollster John McLaughlin from January 25th to January 26th. The poll, which was first reported by Politico, shows 73% of Republicans in the Ruby Red Wyoming view her unfavorably, while 62% of all voters in the state similarly view her unfavorably. Only 10% of GOP voters and 13% of all voters said they would vote to re-elect her, and she trails by more than 30 points, 54% to 21%, against State Senator Anthony Bouchard, who has announced a campaign against her since her impeachment vote. And just 2 weeks since Liz Cheney voted for the impeachment of former President Donald Trump, she has seen her fortunes crash not just in Wyoming, where at least one fellow U.S. House Republican Representative Matt Gaetz traveled to campaign against her, but in the U.S. House GOP conferences as well. As Breitbart News previously reported, more than half of the GOP conference have signed a petition saying they would vote on a secret ballot to oust her as a chair. House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy, meanwhile, has said he supports her staying in the position, but believes she has to answer for her actions. McCarthy opposed the impeachment that Cheney supported. On January 13th, the House voted 323 to 197 to impeach former President Trump. 10 Republican members of the federal House of Representatives also voted to impeach Trump. The most highly profile was the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. For the other 9 House Republicans who voted for Trump's impeachment, McLaughlin wrote in his memo to Miller that he believes Cheney has the highest profile and appears to be paying the biggest political price for it. McLaughlin wrote, "The strong voter sentiment in this survey suggests there could be similar results for the other Republicans who voted for impeachment." The Republican Central Committee of Carbon County voted unanimously 45-0 to censor Representative Liz Cheney for her vote to impeach President Donald J. Trump on January 16th. The resolution claimed the voters of Wyoming expressed their will, their values, and their stated preferences in re-electing President Donald J. Trump by a larger margin and in greater numbers than those who re-elected Representative Cheney. Representative Cheney has violated the trust of her voters, failed to faithfully represent a very large majority of motivated Wyoming voters, and neglected her duty to represent the party and the will of the people who elected her to represent them. On January 28th, a longtime former Trump campaign advisor, Corey Lewandowski, said the former president will continue to be actively involved in Republican Party politics. The president continues to have enormous support and approval among Republican primary voters. He continues to have hundreds of millions of dollars in his campaign account, which he can utilize. And he will continue to be actively involved in recruiting candidates and holding elected officials accountable for their votes. And those Republican lawmakers who ignore public opinion and endorse political impeachment will face challenges. Now, before we move on, I once again would like to make two requests. First, our videos are being removed and demonetized. So if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us. Our donor box link is in the description. And secondly, the censorship continues to be excessively restrictive. And if we get shut down, it would be great, as a safety measure, if you would please sign up to our email list. Okay, let's get back into this. How many of you have experienced the overwhelming ads on websites or apps of an item you wanted to buy after seeing it on Amazon or Google, or just by simply mentioning it in your everyday conversations? On Thursday, Apple CEO Tim Cook claimed at a virtual conference out of Brussels that some apps are collecting too much personal information, resulting in false information abuse and social polarization. Apple had earlier attracted criticism from Facebook for adjusting the privacy policy of the iOS 14 system, which makes it more difficult for apps like Facebook to run targeted and personalized ads. Facebook responded that Apple is using its mobile application store to carry out anti-competitive behavior. Now, Cook said that we've never believed that these detailed profiles of people that have incredibly deep personal information that is patched together from several sources should exist. It can be abused against our democracy. It can be abused by advertisers as well. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is calling this act self-serving and said that Apple's purpose is to drag people away from apps like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp and towards Apple's iMessage and other Apple-built apps. He also argued that this will hurt or even destroy smaller online retailers who survive on personalized ads. Facebook's crisis over data abuse and misuse has always been a drawn attention to its merits. On the contrary, Apple has long positioned itself as a privacy advocate. However, Apple has passed the iCloud service of all iCloud accounts registered in mainland China to a company called GCBD. We are all concerned about the mass surveillance by the CCP for monitoring citizens through digital technologies. How confident is it that Apple handed part of their service to a CCP company while keeping user privacy away from misuse? This is something we have yet to answer. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott is fighting back against the Biden administration's bid to destroy jobs and the oil and gas industry. In an article published by the Epoch Times, Abbott said President Biden's embrace of the Green New Deal is a job killer in Texas. It also takes a wrecking ball to the energy independence that Texas has been able to provide to the United States of America. Biden targeted the oil and gas industry in his first 2 weeks, so now Abbott, with his own executive order, is urging all state agencies to sue the Biden administration. In his executive order, Abbott directed every state agency to use all lawful power and tools to challenge any federal action that threatens the continued strength, vitality, and independence of the energy industry. Abbott continued by stating that each state agency should work to identify potential litigation, notice and comment opportunity, and any other means of preventing federal overreach within the law. If the energy sector in Texas is threatened by Biden's actions, Abbott said that Texas is going to protect the oil and gas industry from any type of hostile attack launched from Washington, D.C. Abbott added that Texas is not going to stand idly by and watch the Biden administration kill jobs in Midland and Odessa or any other place across the entire region. Senator Minority Leader Mitch McConnell also criticized Biden's energy policy as a piecemeal Green New Deal. McConnell added that there's nothing green about a tsunami of pink slips for American workers, or carting Canadian crude around in trucks and trains instead of a pipeline. The decision on federal lands will leave us down nearly 1 million jobs by next year alone. McConnell said on the Senate floor, it's a heck of a way to kick off a presidency. This does not even take into account the number of jobs lost in Canada after Biden killed the Keystone Pipeline last week. John Kerry, the special presidential envoy for climate, claimed on Wednesday that dealing with climate change does not have to come at the expense of the workers in the energy industry, who would have better choices to work at jobs that pay better and that are cleaner, such as being solar power technicians. The question then becomes, are there more than 1 million jobs available at making solar panels? The executive action that has been taken by Biden are all in the name of fighting climate change. These actions include rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, a moratorium on issuing new oil and gas leases on federal lands and waters, and the revoking of the Keystone Pipeline, which would connect the oil sands of Alberta, Canada, with the oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. On Tuesday, the school board of San Francisco voted 6-1 to remove the names of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and many more from public schools, for these figures are tied to slavery, oppression, racism, or the subjugation of human beings. 44 public schools will change their names by April as a result of this decision. President of San Francisco Board of Education, Gabriela Lopez, said, "The resolution came to the school board in the wake of the attack in Charlottesville, and we are working alongside the rest of the country to dismantle symbols of racism and white supremacy culture." However, the city's mayor, London Breed, has reservations of this move. She said the school board should involve communities, families, and students to make such an important decision. It makes little sense to push the changing of school names when there isn't a plan to have students back in the classroom. President George Washington is the first president of the United States. He led the Continental Army to win the Revolutionary War, giving the United States its independence. George Washington is known as the founding father of the country. Some leftist groups claim that Washington's father was a farmer in Virginia and had over 300 slaves on his farm. That somehow makes Washington unworthy of the honor. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. At a time of crisis when the country was facing secession, Lincoln abolished slavery through the Civil War. He emancipated all slaves in the country and preserved the integrity of the Union. Because of all these achievements, Lincoln is revered as one of the greatest presidents in the American history. However, some leftist groups accuse Lincoln of being racist and alleged he did not treat the black and the whites the same. To understand the full picture of the past is not easy. History has its nuances and complexities. Perhaps Washington and Lincoln were not perfect in all aspects, but they are indeed highly respected figures who made significant contributions to this country. Removing their names is like erasing the history of America. Well, that's it for today, my friends. Please like and share, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.